Indiana Sports, powered by the Hoosier.com of the On3 Sports Network. John Alden with you as always, and I've got a busy show for you today. Pretty busy show. I was able to follow up on my promise to you guys of a double dose of not only Zach Osterman, but Jeffrey the Greek, both making appearances on today's show to talk about a number of things. Of course, with Zach Osterman, we'll talk about the NCAA House settlement. He's somebody who definitely fits the bill of somebody whose brain I wanted to pick when it comes to making sense of all of it. Because when it comes to this NIL, all the nonsense and loopholes and different things that come along with it, it's very hard to piece all of it together for somebody like me. He does a good job of laying all of that out. Of course, we also talk about Big Ten football media days coming up here very shortly, and also get his thoughts on how Darren DeVries has really handled his first offseason as the Indiana basketball head coach. So we'll talk to him about all of those things. Also, my friend Jeffrey the Greek from the Eyes on Big podcast, going to make an appearance on the show for the first time in a while, of course, talking a lot of Big Ten football related things. And it's a good conversation with him as well. And then that'll probably be it for today's show, because they gave me, thankfully, enough content to where I'm satisfied. I don't like to make the shows too long. And, I always try to aim for right around an hour. And thankfully, they combined and gave me a good amount of time, a good amount of their time. And I'm very appreciative to them for that. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get things started with Mr. Zach Osterman from the Indianapolis Star. Again, talking about a number of things regarding not only IU athletics, but about the collegiate landscape as a whole. Joining me now from the Indianapolis Star, Zach Osterman. Welcome back to In Touch with Indiana Sports. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me. Sorry, it's I know we've been dancing around. I think my vacation's mostly a little bit to get this done. So,
well, it is that time of year, and I didn't even realize that you covered the Pacers. You're not somebody who typically do. You usually cover the Pacers? I know you kind of followed along with what they were doing during their deep run this year.
Yeah, no, I got looped in just because of shortages kind of elsewhere.
Okay.
It's fun. It's a little different, obviously.
Yeah,
it being a really fun story for Indianapolis and our readership, so it was fun to be part of it. But happy to check back out a little bit for the summer. So
yeah, basketball all the way to the end of June. You get a little bit of time off, and now we're just a couple of weeks away from Big Ten football media days. It's almost like sports go year round nowadays, it seems like. But before I get into kind of Indiana football, looking ahead to the next season, some Indiana basketball stuff as well, I did kind of save this to ask somebody that I know would talk better about it than myself, and that's the House versus NCAA settlement. I know that's going to really change college athletics as a whole this season, and I want to hear just kind of your interpretation of it and how Indiana's kind of tackling it early on. Because whenever I've seen what other schools have done, like University of Kentucky, for example, they've raised ticket prices exponentially. I'm just kind of curious how you've seen things play out so far from your perspective as well as from the IU perspective.
Yeah, I think, listen, there is we could do hours on that, to be honest with you. And I'm not trying to be flippant, like we really could. But I think in terms of the nuts and bolts, I think most schools have had enough time to sit with this that they're ready for a lot of it. There's not the concern about what are we going to do with this. You know what I mean? Like, how are we going to manage all of this? Everybody's gotten the time to kind of understand, okay, this is the strategy we want to take. This is the way we're going to split the money and all that different stuff. The question is really, I think, more around the one that, if you want to talk about, is what's keeping athletics directors up at night. It is the wider question of the balance between NIL and revenue sharing. And revenue sharing, which is a fixed number that is, at least on paper, the same for everyone. It's a maximum of $20.5 million. There are different ways it can be split up. And then there's the NIL piece, which the House settlement of course, had this had the apparatus set up for the NIL clearinghouse, NIL Go, and there's a question of whether that is going to kind of pull a little bit more sense into the market, so to speak, and that has been when I say that, I mean NIL has been, pretty much since collectives kind of figured out how to operate functionally and legally within the NIL space. It is a market that has just kept inflating and inflating and inflating. And of course, so much of that is athletics departments driving donor dollars to NIL collectives. What the clearinghouse is supposed to do, it's housed within the NCAA. Any NIL deal over $600 goes to it goes to the clearinghouse, where Deloitte, which anybody who's familiar with the Kelly School will know what Deloitte does. It's just like one of the large financial firms internationally. Will audit the deal, and the term that everyone is using, I think this is from the House settlement itself, is fair market value. If the Deloitte basically looks at the athlete in question, their popularity, their social media following, their just generally their appeal on like a commercial scale, and then they look at the terms of the deal, and they either say that matches up. This is, given who this athlete is and the likely sort of, value of their quote unquote brand, their fair market value. This is, fair work for money. We approve the deal. It's fine. Or they say, no, this is inflated, because the numbers that I've talked to a few different coaches, and the numbers that I've come across is anywhere from like 80 to 85% of the average like large school NIL deal run through a collective is really just money pushed into the deal to entice the athlete to come to, in this case, let's say Indiana, which isn't illegal. Let's be really clear. It's not illegal. But that is the sort of like, that means it's like 15 to 20% like true NIL. So true to whatever a player's fair market value is. And what the clearinghouse is supposed to do is basically rein that back in and say, all the money in an NIL deal needs to be fully reflective of the value that the player provides or presents to whoever they're entering into the deal with.
So there's more of a science to it now, but it's also subjective in the fact that the clearinghouse has to kind of have their own opinion on who the player might be.
Well, and the issue that everyone has is basically what right?
What are the parameters and that sort of
thing?
What
right does the NCAA or even maybe to some extent Deloitte have to tell an athlete what their fair market value is? If there's a car dealer kingpin that wants to pay Trace Jackson Davis $1 million to make, appearances at 3 different dealerships and take a picture in front of his new truck, like what is that? What is it? What basically? Why does the NCAA get to say no? That's not enough work for value. This is clearly just money meant to funnel. This is clearly just meant to funnel money to the athlete to get him to play for, State U.
And plus, a certain player's value won't necessarily be what it is at the time of joining a team versus when they actually get on the court of the field. If they end up being a lot better or worse, that obviously changes the value of said player.
No, it does. I mean, and again, there's not a great answer to that. And there's sort of this has been one of those things that has been, sort of from its inception, everyone has thought this is going to get challenged somewhere legally, and we're going to have to go through the process again and find out whether the NCAA can create any structure that allows for somehow kind of governing the NIL space. Because when I say what keeps athletics directors up at night, and we can have a philosophical discussion about how college athletics got to where it is now, but what keeps them up at night is, you have the revenue sharing piece which is about $20 million, and everybody knows what that is, and it's going to go up by 4% next year, and then 4% competitive the year after that, and so on. But if the NIL piece doesn't flatten out at some point, you can't keep funding both fully. So far, athletics departments have been able to fill the ones that are expected to fill that revenue sharing bucket fully, your Big Tens, your SECs, your Big 12s, et cetera, have been able to fill that by and large without cutting sports or doing too much that kind of impacts the athlete experience. But if the expectation continues to rise in terms of how much money you have to push into your NIL collective to be competitive while also filling the revenue sharing bucket, that's difficult. And then, it's also affected. It's worth saying, like I know people who care, and a lot of people don't, but people who care have kind of been conditioned to sort of believe that the TV money will go up forever, but it won't. At a certain point, we are going to start seeing that flatten out. And in the near term, people forget that there is a settlement portion of the House settlement, which is the roughly, I think it's either 2.4 or $2.6 billion set aside as basically, in essence, a class action sort of settlement, going back to the start date of the House, the start date, I think it's the start date of the beginning of the athletic careers of the plaintiffs in the House case, the actual athletes that brought the House first NCAA case. And so, that is going to be sort of dispersed out to anyone who makes a claim, and it's going to be paid via TV revenues, which means that even if, let's say, for example, the Big Ten's TV deal keeps going up and up and up, that still for a period of time is going to get sort of bled out to pay for the settlement. So the point is the financials are kind of rocky. In terms of sharing with athletes, I don't think athletics departments or athletic directors are that worried about that piece of it. I think they've all kind of, they've had time to figure out what their strategy is going to be. They're all kind of eyes wide open in terms of saying, okay, we thought, what needs to change, what maybe was going to seem like best practice 6 months ago, now we know isn't. It's more the balance with NIL and how to try and create some financial stability in this sort of player compensation market so that everyone can kind of understand where they're operating in the medium to long term, if that makes sense.
Yeah, just a lot of new and moving parts, and I'm sure kind of like whenever NIL first became a thing a few years ago, you'll kind of see as things continue to progress what that'll eventually look like. And it may look totally different 2 to 3 years from now, again, as it is in this upcoming season. But I do want to transition to Indiana football and Big Ten Media Days. We're just a little over a week from that getting rolling out in Las Vegas. First of all, I mean, I'm sure you don't like having to travel out to Vegas for this sort of thing, being it usually is in Chicago or Indianapolis. But outside of that, what are you kind of expecting to hear from Kurt Cignetti as he gets his team ready for his second season as the head coach?
Well, what's funny is I actually, I will freely admit I'm not going because they only sent one of us, and
okay.
Or they're only going to, I guess the better way to say it is they're only going to send one of us. And Mike Neislick drew that straw, and I'm going to Puerto Rico. So we're each getting, we're each getting a little bit more summer work than we expected. Listen, I think you've got to be ready for this. I mean, that just the wider idea of pushing Big Ten events westward, not necessarily permanently. Listen, Indianapolis, Chicago, these are going to remain sort of the lifeblood, kind of centers,
the hubs of the Big Ten. Yeah.
But if you're putting West Coast teams in the conference and you're asking television distributors, media partners, commercial partners to embrace the idea that you're now a bi-coastal conference, you're going to have to act that way sometimes. Now, I'm a little surprised because I think, haven't we moved the Big Ten? Well, I guess they haven't announced any. Have they announced a Big Ten championship game move to Las Vegas? I don't know that they have.
I don't think so.
I guess my assumption would simply be that my assumption would be at this point that that's where we're headed.
Yeah.
That, basically, if we're putting media days in Las Vegas before we're putting them in LA, that we are going to put the Big Ten championship game in Las Vegas before we put it in LA. But one way or the other, obviously, we do know that there's going to be a Big Ten men's basketball tournament in Las Vegas. I would not be at all surprised to see other Big Ten events move there. I wouldn't even be certain of what, the idea. I know in the past the Big Ten has, sort of like set up an office in New York, and so it has like a presence there kind of permanently. I wouldn't be shocked if we go through something like that as time goes on. The point is, it's just about the conference behaving, as I said, in a more bi-coastal manner, essentially. Now, yes, will the league's media love to go to Las Vegas in July? Maybe, maybe not. That is, I bet you can get some decent hotel rates. I'm guessing that is one of the times when Las Vegas is a little bit more hard up for tourists. But one way or the other, it's still going to be what it's always been, or at least what it has evolved into is probably a better way to put it, which is very much a made-for-TV event. It's always been kind of this kickoff event. I mean, they had quite literally had the Big Ten kickoff luncheon is what they called it forever. And they have always treated in a way that they didn't the basketball media day, which, frankly, is kind of just almost just sort of wedged into the calendar. Football media day has always been kind of this, a bit of this sort of celebration.
It's almost like a kickoff to the season.
Yeah. The whole athletic year is starting now.
Yeah.
It has become a much more, television driven thing. BTN is always there. Now Fox brings personalities out there. CBS, of course, brings personalities out there because, again, these are the media partners now. It's not just ESPN, it's not just Fox. You got to make sure that you are, kind of bringing everybody into the fold, so to speak. But it remains anymore, I think, much more driven by putting people on TV, getting people to watch, stream. Because this is also, listen, this is the time of year when the average fan is probably a little bit more hard up for football than they want to admit. So yeah, they might watch, 30 minutes of their head coach and some athletes talking to the media. Like if you do that in October, who's watching it? Because there's a lot going on. But right now, if you're an IU football fan and you want IU football content, I mean, media days where to get it. So it is, I think everyone has come to realize that, and it has driven further and further in that direction. It still has value for print media. Don't get me wrong. It still has value for us. But the flip side is there was probably a time when you actually needed to go to Hayden Fry and just be like, so who's going to be, who are your guys this year? Because you graduated him and him and him and him, who's the next great Iowa fill in the blank? Well, now you don't need that. We watch all these kids as recruits. We see social media, there's blanketed coverage of spring games and whatever else. And, people are constantly updating depth charts. So that, that need at media day has probably passed a little bit. But there is also, I do think, and this is maybe the one thing I will miss because I'm not going out to Vegas. There is something kind of nice about just being able to sort of set my own clock a little bit and just sort of feel okay, the season has started now. I'm at media day. I'm checking in with all these other beat reporters, have questions for, James Crepea at Oregon or, somebody who covers, Jim Tolson at, or Polson. I said Tolson. Polson at what, Wisconsin, whatever. It's nice to have those check-ins, and it's nice for everybody to kind of feel a little bit like they all we all get to kind of kick that off together, and that's going to be a little bit weird not to have. But again, I think these events have been, further away from like the traditional needs of print media every year for quite a long time, and that's fine because we've been able to fill those gaps in other ways. So.
Well, along the lines of you mentioned it being a made-for-TV event, and I totally agree with you. Last year specifically, Curt Cignetti went viral, it's seemingly multiple times, especially when you saw them re-referencing some of the sound bites that came out of his mouth during last year's Big Ten Media Days when Indiana football went on the run that they did. They were constantly showing, him talking about being picked 17th out of 18th, and how in previous programs he's been able to win the league or be second in the league, that sort of thing, after being picked like that. That's what it seems like this is more about. So I tend to think that Cignetti, he's always going to be himself. So I don't necessarily expect him to completely tone down his nature at this year's Media Days, but I don't think he needs to come out and say nearly the seemingly outlandish things that he did. At least they seemed outlandish at the time, maybe. I don't think you'll necessarily get that from Cignetti in Vegas next week. Maybe I'm wrong, though.
No, I mean, you're right. He won't change who he is. I think I do think there is a bit of a what is the word I'm looking for? It's also a shift in the context. That's, I think, the word around Indiana. Last year, he talked about, something that stuck with me with Cignetti in like the breadth of year one was that first day on the job when he gets on the microphone at the basketball game and says, Purdue sucks and blah, blah, blah. And he said it because as he went through the day, he had more and more people talking to him like, we'd love to go 6-6. We'd love to get into a bowl game. That'd be a great first year. And he just thought, no, like we need to set the bar higher. And that seemed to color a lot of his public comments in his first year. I'm not sure that there wasn't a common thread beyond just Curt Cignetti's personality that you could weave through comments at the Maryland game, the Google Me comment, all the stuff he says at Media Day, and kind of the idea that, like, here's someone trying to emphatically deliver what is the word I'm looking for? Basically just a culture change, a sea change via words as well as actions. Well, he doesn't need to do that this year. And he might dispute where Indiana's picked to finish this place or that place or whatever, but he doesn't need to get up there and say those things because I don't think he feels like the people who that message was probably aimed at need it again this year. Now, he's still kind of unintentionally colorful. Like he has a little bit of that Steve Spurrier capacity for just being really sort of like dry and funny, and even if he doesn't necessarily mean to be, and a little bit, sort of like a amusing,
very Bob Knightish, I've even said before.
Yeah, like just amusingly sarcastic, but
yeah.
But I don't think I don't think when people took it as maybe bombast or arrogance, I don't think it was directed externally last year. I think it was directed internally. I think it was directed at his fans, to what extent he felt he needed it to be, to his locker room, to people around the program. And I don't know that he feels like that needs to be, it's worth saying, you talk, like we're talking about this in the context of him saying it last year at Media Days, but he hasn't really had too many. I mean, has he had a viral quote along the lines of anything he said in his first 9 months on the job since the season ended? Probably not. He said stuff during the season, we're the emerging superpower of college football, or, we beat top 25 teams or whatever. But I think he maybe feels like he doesn't have to say some of that stuff so much anymore. I think there was a purpose behind a lot of that, and I don't think it was aimed at anyone really outside the program. Maybe a little bit as the season goes on and he feels like he's got a politic with the playoff and all that stuff, but for the most part, that always felt like it was aimed internally. And I think part of the reason that we come out of the spring season, we get through the summer, he's done sit-down interviews with people, he's talked to national media and whatever else, and we haven't had any of those moments. We haven't had any of that, like, oh, did you see what Curt Cignetti said today? Might be in part because he doesn't feel like it needs said anymore. Now, he could get up there at media day and prove me wrong. He could get up there at media day and just say something outlandish. He could guarantee a national championship or whatever. But I wouldn't be stunned if he doesn't, in part because he just doesn't feel like that's necessary at the level that it was a year ago, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, I've got you for a few more minutes. I do want to ask you just a little bit about Indiana basketball. You mentioned you're going down to Puerto Rico for the trip that will be in early August. What are kind of your thoughts on Darren DeVries' first offseason since he's been hired? I know everybody's excited. It seems like just for anytime there's a new coach, basketball, football, whatever it may be, the initial, I mean, you may have questions about the coach initially, but it does seem like it's easier to get excited when things are brand new. From your perspective, how do you feel that DeVries has handled this first offseason and then preparing to get ready for this Puerto Rico offseason trip?
Yeah, I mean, it has been in a very pronounced way, very subdued. I know that sounds a little bit like, that sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but it at least from where I sit, there has been a lot of, I think maybe as much as anything, what DeVries promised at the outset, which was that his way of doing things is to basically set all the foundations at the beginning so that you don't wind up, if you do all the hard work at the beginning, you don't wind up having to do fixed jobs down the line, for lack of a better term. And I think maybe we've seen some of that in the way that, he's gone about building his roster, or in the way, some of the public messaging. Obviously there hasn't been a ton of public messaging. Let's be honest. But if there's one bit that I think is one moment from this summer that struck me, it's that if anyone who's not spent time around DeVries, my impression of him, which has only been reinforced, but people I've talked to in the business, is that he is pretty low key. And that, especially for a college basketball coach, he's intense, and he's very, generally, I think for the most part, very positive. But he's not a sloganeer. He's not you're not going to get some of the Curt Cignetti out of him, I don't think, and you're not going to get the program cheerleader or whatever. It struck me though that when we were down at Huber with him in late May, the way he turned it on in front of that crowd, without it seeming forced or fake, was still noticeable to me. And I think that does suggest an ability to connect with people, I think at a certain like basic level, essentially, that I think is very valuable for someone in that job. So I think in that respect, if you're looking for little clues, little hints, little bits and pieces, I would bring that up. But I don't think that there's really been a lot of dramatic takeaways. Obviously, the portal window, just by the nature of the way it works anymore, is going to feel a little bit dramatic because you got visitors running in and out of town, and we're targeting this guy. No, we're not anymore because this guy committed, or now we have to target this guy because that guy committed somewhere else, whatever. And it feels like it's moving at a breakneck pace. But since then, it really has calmed down. I am curious to see if Indiana broadcasts any of their games in Puerto Rico. They didn't out of the Bahamas in Mike Woodson's first year, but I know Kentucky broadcast games from its 4-2 tour under Mark Pope last year, and there was a very pronounced sort of, we're doing this because we want to create some excitement, some momentum heading into the season. And I would argue that it probably worked, it kind of gave people something to hold on to, basically. I think my suspicion is Indiana won't, because
it's so interesting. Louisville did the same thing too with Pat Kelsey. No, I think they were in a different location.
I would argue.
By the way, it's just so weird. Indiana's always just so to themselves with a lot of things.
No, it is. I mean, I think it's a program culture that probably predates anybody who's there now. Probably even predated Mike Woodson in some ways, but I think it's going to be interesting to see how they. I guess maybe the better way to put it is it's going to be interesting to see how they whether they use the Puerto Rico trip as a way to kind of introduce some excitement into the season
as a real marketing tool instead of just being something
as more than just a build up to the season.
Yeah.
But either way, I mean, it has been, I think, noticeable how subdued, it's not that reserved is probably the better way to put it. Like that this is, I think the way Indiana's gone about its business in the spring and summer has probably reflected the coach in a pretty substantial way. And I suspect that's a good thing. Listen, wins and losses are the end, that's the long and short of it. If a coach is bombastic and ostentatious and wins, then people will say, well, he wins because he's that way. And if a coach is, it's the old Kirk Ferentz thing. When Iowa football's winning, it's because Ferentz is stoic and tough, and all of his qualities reflect the best qualities of his teams. And look at, Iowa football, just that culture that starts with the head coach. And then when they're losing, it's, they're boring and they can't move the ball and the offense is outdated and, Ferentz is out of his depth. Like it's all just defined in the end by winning and losing. But I do think that I think Indiana's sort of like reserved, let us show you, not tell you start to Darren DeVries' tenure is probably just reflective of DeVries' own sort of personality and approach. And I think that's probably a good thing.
Zach, I appreciate your time as always. You just put something out, I believe, for the Indy Star a couple of days ago. If you want to give that a plug before I let you go.
Yeah, I basically just looked at the I think it was 7 IU Bay. So we're talking on Sunday, the 13th, not to overdate this. I hope that's not going to get anybody in trouble.
Oh, no, it's totally fine.
But it is the day of the start of the Major League Baseball draft. And of course, Indiana may well see Devin Taylor picked in the first round, especially if you count the compensatory picks that come between the first and second rounds as first rounders, which people tend to. And so I just look back at like the 7 first round picks Indiana's had in the past, 4 of whom I think I covered. There were 3, of course, in one year in 2009. I covered that team in 08 and 09. Kyle Schwarber is the most recent and certainly the most successful. I think it's fair to say one of the 2 most successful IU alums in baseball history, Ted Klaczewski being the other. But there were some other interesting stories in there. There was, and I don't have it right in front of me, so I'm not remembering names, forgive me, but like there was a guy who played for the old Hawaii Islanders, which was a AAA. I have no idea what the travel situation for that team was, but like there was, and they were pretty good. Like they had a fair amount of success. I want to say they were a Dodgers affiliate, maybe an Angels affiliate. But they played at the AAA level, and he played for Chuck Tanner, who was the skipper for the 1979 Pittsburgh Pirates World Series team. There was another guy who was the first ever pick in a draft that doesn't exist anymore. From 66 to 86, baseball held a secondary draft in January, and an IU player was picked first overall in that secondary draft, and famously in the same first round as Tom Seaver, who was picked by the Braves. And then there were some disputes. Baseball tried to cancel his contract because his Southern Cal team had participated in some exhibition games, even though he hadn't played in them. But then he couldn't go back to college because he'd already signed a professional contract. And I think there were some threats of lawsuits and things. And I never really understood this, especially as a Braves fan. But somehow or another, baseball's solution was to let someone else sign him for the same amount of money. And of course, he very famously wound up putting together a Hall of Fame career, primarily with the Mets. So anyway, it's just, it's an interesting kind of, trip down memory lane for a program that ultimately, up until recently, doesn't, and I'm not saying this flippantly, doesn't have a ton of history at the Major League Baseball level. We're probably at a point right now where I think there are 4 or 5 former Hoosiers on active rosters on 26 mans right now. And I would have to think if that's not a program record, at any one time, it's got to be close. So Taylor might join them. We'll see. He's widely regarded as one of the best college hitters in the draft. And so I just put something together kind of looking at other players who'd walked that line.
Zach Osterman, appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of your summer, however much of it you have left. I know you're going down to Puerto Rico, but
I was going to say it starts to go faster than you want it to around this time of year.
July definitely creeps up on you once things get later on in the month. So enjoy that time, however much of it you got left. And I'm sure we'll catch up again soon here as the seasons ramp up here very shortly.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, as always.
As always, big thanks to Zach for his expertise and wealth of knowledge on really anything I ask him about. So I appreciate him and his time. Now we're going to transition into someone who is, I was going to say it's a little more of a fun conversation. I enjoy both the conversations, but y'all know that Jeffrey the Greek, it's definitely a more, it's a different type of perspective. That's why I like having both of these guys on at the same time today. Jeffrey the Greek from the Eyes on Big podcast, here to talk about Big Ten football, the Indiana Hoosiers, and really what to expect as we get ready for another college football season just around the corner. From the Eyes on Big podcast, it is one of my favorite guests. It is Jeffrey the Greek. Welcome back to In Touch with Indiana Sports. Pleasure to have you back on the show.
John, always great to talk to you. I very appreciate the compliment. And I appreciate even more that we ain't that far out. You know, we're 6 weeks out to seeing the helmets cracking. It's coming on quick.
I know I was having this conversation on a previous episode, and I was looking at the calendar, and I was like, we're only a couple of weeks away from media days. And not that media days is always super exciting. It can be, depending on what sound bites come out of it and that sort of thing. But it's kind of the next really big milestone step, if you will, towards getting a new college football season underway. And I mean, I feel like this offseason, at least for me, it's flown by. Part of it's because I had the Pacers to kind of keep me company for a little while. There was a lot of stuff going on with them making the finals. And I mean, that takes you all the way towards the end of June. And here we are almost midway through July, and we're about to get another college football season rolling.
Yeah, for you. So you go, I mean, it's crazy how late into the summer the NBA playoffs go.
It's crazy, yeah.
And then you're right up against the fourth, you know, and so that was a big long weekend for everybody. And then you kind of get caught up with work midweek after the fourth, and then you get through the weekend where we're at now, and you're like, hey, it's a smooth set, you know, it's just a straight shot to college. That's how it goes for me every single year. So like I've been doing this countdown that I started at 100 days out.
Yes.
Around 70 or 80, I'm like, what did I get myself into here? You know, this is ridiculous. But now all of a sudden, I mean, we're at 41 days. I was going to save the like unit rankings until I learn more about these teams. Okay. You know, and all of a sudden I'm like, I got to start putting these things out, you know, because we're not that far out. We're just over a month out.
It is crazy how it sneaks up on you, but that can only be a good thing, as we've kind of been gushing about for these first few minutes here. And you've been kind of doing your own little things, as you mentioned. One thing I'm going to get into here in a little bit, I'll save it for a little bit, though, your barn burners list. I'm excited to talk about, of course, one of the Indiana games that you have on that barn burners list.
Me too.
But I'll start off with this question. Big Ten the last couple of years has been the best conference in college football for being, let's just put it out there. Everyone that's not in the SEC or the Big Ten tends to favor the SEC, I feel like. And I know we're both Big Ten guys, so we typically favor the Big Ten. But when you had the back-to-back national champions and you've had several teams, especially last year, that aren't just Ohio State or Michigan, and you didn't even have Michigan make the playoff last year. You have a number of representatives that make the playoff. It's definitely fair to say that the ball is at least shifted more towards the Big Ten's favor in the last several years. What are kind of your initial expectations for the conference as we head into another season?
So the thing I would say is just to build on your point a little bit. John, I was always told that the team that won the national championship, the conference that they came from, that was how you determine the best, right? That's what we were told all those years with the SEC. If you have the team that wins the national championship, that must mean you have conference superiority. So that's all we need, correct, John? The Big Ten's been the best.
That metric, of course.
Yes. Okay. And obviously I'm being a little facetious there because I don't think anybody thought the ACC was the best
Yeah.
conference when Clemson won a couple. So with that being said, I believe there has been way too much shade thrown at the Big Ten past what I guess I would call the top four, right? That it's just so easy in the Big Ten past those top four. So even the past few years, I think that's been grossly overstated. I think the middle of the conference has been a lot tougher than many people outside the Big Ten footprint would give it credit for. With that being said, this year, I think it's even tougher. And in fact, I think 1 through 10, that's right, 1 through 10, we have 10 teams that I think can at least make the Big Ten championship. That's not to say every one of those 10 teams could win the Big Ten championship. I want to give a shout out to a different podcast, the Inside the Pylon podcast. They had a fun podcast where they did kind of like a buy and sell, things. And one of the hosts bought the middle of the Big Ten. And it was refreshing to hear somebody else say this, like the middle of the Big Ten is tough. And I can't wait to see this play out. Like, John, I think way too many people are just assuming it's going to be Ohio State, Oregon, or Penn State. One of those three, two of those three teams are going to get to Indy. I think we've got a lot of craziness that is going to come out of this Big Ten season.
And one of the early storylines when it comes to kind of dark horses, and it's gotten a lot more chatter than I kind of expected it would. And maybe it's just because when you saw what Indiana did last year, everybody's looking for what people have been kind of quoting as the next Indiana, and Illinois has been the easy name for that. Why do you think it's almost to the point where it seems like there's pressure on Illinois to make the playoff, which is kind of crazy if you're an Illinois fan or a player, coach, whatever it may be? What are your thoughts on that?
So I've been workshopping this, John. You tell me if this works. If a team that has been dubbed a dark horse so many times, I think you cease to be a dark horse and you are now a bright horse. Is that what Illinois is? It's okay.
I've never heard that before, but I like that.
Okay, that's mine. I'd like to put the TM stamp on that right there. So that's what Illinois is like, and also to compare Illinois 2025 to Indiana 2024, it doesn't work anyway. I mean, no. Indiana went from to pat myself on the back here. I picked Indiana 6-6. I had Indiana fans saying thank you. Finally, somebody sees.
That was a generous prediction going into last season.
It was wrong. It wasn't nearly generous enough. But my point I'm trying to make is Hoosier fans were excited that I picked Indiana to make a bowl. Nobody's not picking Illinois to make a bowl. The question, in fact, I just put a poll out this morning. Who's the better, team that will live up to expectations? Penn State getting to the national championship game, or Illinois making the college football playoff? Like, if you are in debate to make the college football playoff, you're not a dark horse. That's when you become the bright horse right there. And that is not to say Illinois doesn't deserve that talk. They absolutely deserve that talk. But I would have other teams. In fact, there's one team that I would put in the true dark horse, AKA the team that could wind up, pulling a Hoosier this year. I would have different teams for that.
So are you going to save who those are for later?
Well, let's do this. Curious. Yeah, we'll do it. How about this? I'm gonna give you my 10 teams that I think are a threat to make the Big Ten championship. Okay, so we start with the does, right? Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon, and I would throw Michigan in there. Anytime you start the offseason about talking about Big Ten teams that can make the Big Ten championship, you're pretty much going to start with those four. Michigan would be the one that we obviously have the most questions about.
Yes,
but they've got the talent, they've got the pedigree. We think
it's a big year for Sharon Moore specifically with Michigan
for sure, and their quarterback. That whenever you're expecting that much from a quarterback, whether he's five-star or not, when he's a freshman, it makes it tough. Okay, then after that, Illinois. We talked about that. I think you have to consider them a team to get into Indy. Iowa, Nebraska, USC, Washington. Oh, who am I forgetting? Indiana. That is 6 more teams off the 4 that I just gave. Was there any of those 6 that you think I'm being outlandish, where you could see things falling together and make Indianapolis?
In terms of outlandishness, I think just thinking about the regression from 2 years ago to last year, I think about Washington. But of course, they were going through a regime change and that sort of thing. What do you like about Washington kind of taking another big step forward this year?
Funny you ask that, because that's my true dark horse team in the Big Ten. All right. The actual team that didn't blow people's doors off last year is, again, Illinois won 10 games last year. Okay. Washington barely made it into a bowl, lost the bowl to finish with the losing record. I could see them putting things together to get to that Indiana-ish 10-2 season. If that's enough to get them into Indianapolis, I don't know. Indiana didn't get into Indianapolis, but it was enough to get Washington into the Indiana into the college football playoff. I'm pretty high on Wash. Certainly there's some concerns I have with them, but that would be my first actual dark horse team. And then if you want to get down into the weeds, as far as a team that would be most equal or looks like Indiana 23-24, so in this case 24-25, as in a team that nobody's expecting, but yet they're kind of putting things together behind the scenes and can maybe make a run, it would be Michigan State. I mean, nobody would see Michigan State putting things together and making the college football playoffs, but I think I could see that potential. That would be the most similar one to Indiana, what they did last year.
What do you make of Ohio State's chances to just repeat, have a back-to-back national champion? How likely is that, you think?
Very unlikely. And I say that for anybody. Any team that does this 2 years in a row, I mean, there's a reason why it's so hard to do. I think that one of the biggest reasons is something that you heard Nick Saban talk about all the time, which is the rat poison. He'd always joke about that. And you've gotten all those pats on the back. You have everybody telling you how good you are. People are just penciling Ohio State in. You got to find that fire, right? Along with the fact that they lost our coordinator, they lost their D coordinator, they have question marks at quarterback as far as a bona fide, stud person that we've seen. So those are big question marks for Ohio State that would really make it tough for me to see them repeating. Now, the other thing I would say is people seem to be feeling sorry for them along the lines, the O-line and D-line. Their O-lines and D-lines are going to be absolutely fine. And then obviously you got Jonathan Smith on offense. So he could probably make even a somewhat mediocre offensive coordinator look pretty good at times. So tons to love about Ohio State, but going all the way back to win it all. I mean, they got 2 losses last year, and their team was loaded. So hard to see that.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but is your current favorite to win maybe not only the Big Ten, but the national championship? Is it Penn State right now?
Hey, it makes sense, right? 2023, Michigan, senior-laden team, came back, got it done. 2024, Ohio State, senior-laden team, came back and got it done. This is Penn State. It just fits in perfectly, right? I don't know, John, you have 2 things that you have to weigh. The positive for Penn State fans is all that stuff, the returning, the returning production. I got both their running backs back, got their quarterback back. I really like their offensive line. Their defense is always good. The schedule is gettable. That's all the good stuff. The not so great stuff is I got to see Penn State beat Ohio State first. I got to see Penn State, beat the upper echelon teams, let alone beat 2, maybe 3 of them in the college football playoffs to get there. So anybody that thinks Penn State's going to just go to town and win this thing, they're not going to get any argument from me. If somebody thinks that Penn State might not quite live up to expectations, I can see that too.
Yeah, and that's one of Indiana's big road games this year. They got a lot of really tough road games this season. You got Penn State on the road, Oregon on the road, your Iowa Hawkeyes on the road. I know I'm kind of basing or transitioning to this question based on what we just talked about, but if you're Indiana and you're looking, and I know you don't play all 3 of those games back to back, but what would you be happy with? I think Indiana can still have a good record, even if you lose all 3 of those road games. But what would you say if you're Kirk Cignetti and the Hoosiers? What's kind of your goal with those 3 games in particular?
I mean, I'm glad we're talking about that because I want to say this, and I swear I almost maybe me knowing that this interview was coming up, it put Hoosiers in the back of my mind. But I was thinking about the Hoosiers kind of when I woke up this morning, and I got to say, and again, I am not just trying to play to your audience. This is honestly what I think. Basically, the big talk you hear with Indiana is all lazy takes. It essentially just is the same thing over and over again. Well, they don't got that 2024 schedule. Let's see how they do this year. Let me ask you, how sick are you and Hoosier fans of hearing that one talking point right now?
Oh, it's been aggravating for, I mean, I would say almost a year, but really that discussion didn't come into play until Indiana started doing good things last year. And when you go back to this point in time, before the season started last year, the schedule looked kind of tough. You had back-to-back, you had the national champion in Michigan, you had Washington, the national runner-up, and of course Ohio State and whoever else ended up being tough on the schedule. And Nebraska was expected to be better. They weren't bad. Yep. Whenever Indiana played Nebraska, they only had 1 loss, or maybe they were undefeated. I can't remember. That was a big game at the time. Nebraska 100%. Kind of fell off after the fact. Michigan State was a bit of a disappointing team last year, at least from where people thought they might be, even though Jonathan Smith was a new head coach with the Spartans. Right. And so there was a lot of teams on Indiana's schedule that just kind of didn't live up to expectations. And so it benefited Indiana, but at the same time, it didn't benefit the way that people talked about Indiana.
Did the teams not live up to expectations, or did Indiana just boat race teams that weren't good enough to stick with Indiana? I mean, that's
the other thing. When Indiana boat races a team, it doesn't matter what year it is. They just assume that the team that Indiana's playing against is that much worse than they're supposed to be.
Inferior. Correct. Yeah. That was not the case. Like, I saw that Nebraska team up close. Like, it had a good defense. It just got absolutely outclassed and out-schemed by the Hoosiers that day. Give the Hoosiers credit for it. So then folding into 2025, okay. Do I think Indiana is going to go 11-1? I don't believe I'm going to predict that. But, okay, because it is a tougher schedule. All right, like if I look at Iowa's schedule, I don't think they're going to go 10-2 because of how hard Iowa's schedule is. Okay, Nebraska, we just talked about, they have more of a favorable schedule. Okay, so like schedule plays in. People overstate it though. I've been saying this on the podcast and on Twitter for a couple years now. You know why Indiana went 11-1 last year? Because they were freaking good, okay? And then they got knocked down because they didn't beat or look especially great at Notre Dame, a college football playoff game in their stadium against the team that went toe-to-toe with Ohio State all the way to the end. There was a lot of teams that would have went into Notre Dame at the end of the year last year and not looked great. So I have never bought that crap. And let me try this again. Now coming into 2025, 11-1 seems tougher to pull off this year for sure. But don't you get the feeling that now with these college football quote unquote experts and pundits, they think it's either option A, Indiana somehow pulls off going 11-1 again, or B, they fall all the way back to 6-6. I feel like there's a lot of rungs of success in between 11-1 and barely making a bowl where Indiana could land and it could still be a quote unquote good season. Like, wouldn't 9-3, wouldn't that mean Indiana prove themselves again? That it's a good program. That's
one thing I wanted to get into today as well, and you're helping me get into it here, is that I think the next step for Indiana, it's not of course, if you get back to a playoff and win a playoff game, that's phenomenal. But the next step for Indiana as a program is stringing together consecutive good seasons. If you want to build a program and have expectations year in and year out, where you're like 9 wins is kind of the regular expectation, the way that Iowa football, I assume, usually is. That's what I've always hoped Indiana would become, where every few years, maybe you fall off a little bit, but then also every few years you have that season where you get to 10 or 11 wins and get to a playoff like they did last year. So I think that's what Kurt Cignetti is ultimately trying to get with Indiana here over however long his tenure ends up being in Bloomington.
Right.
I think he wants to build a consistent winner more so than just have, a fluky 11-year or 11-win season.
And to build on that, since you used Iowa, this reminds me back at the beginning of the Kirk Ferentz era, where now we didn't get there as fast. I was on those football teams in 99 and 2000. We had much more of a foundation we had to put into place. We didn't really have the transfer portal back then because I'm old AF. But by Kirk's fourth year, that was the 12-0 or 11-1 regular season share of the Big Ten championship. Everybody offseason was like, that was a nice story, Iowa. I'm not even sure if Iowa was picked in the top 25 to start the next year. Look at Indiana. It's rare that you see Indiana voted into the top 25, or at least it's not a mainstay. And Iowa went out and won 10 games again that next year. They seized on that opportunity. It is my opinion that Indiana will be closer to seizing on that opportunity to look good. There's a lot I like about the team, like just, personnel, let alone the coaching staff. So I don't know, man, I am, Hoosier fans have been loud in the offseason, but if I was in their position, I would be annoyed as well, because it is like so many non-Indiana fans are just trying to just make it go away. It's so annoying, John. You always hear about how people get bored with the same teams at the top of these conferences, and then a team rises up and has success, and people immediately start tearing them down. It's one of the more annoying things.
Yeah, and I try to remember where I was going to go from there. My mind is spinning in so many different directions and places I want to go to. If I can get back to that thought, I'll bring it back up. But I do want to go ahead and get into something I teased in at the beginning of this segment, and that is your barn burners list that you came out with. I think it was about a month ago at this point.
Yeah,
but
it was
the
a while
number
ago.
one reason, of course, I'm bringing it up is the fact that you've got Indiana and Illinois at the top of that list, and I'm sure it's for numerous reasons. Both teams kind of they're in that dark horse tier, bright horse tier, as you coined earlier in this segment. Illinois being the darling specifically going into this season. But one thing you kind of laid out, and I think it's a perfect way to kind of sum up what the narratives will be like before, during, and after this game, is that the result could project one team into what their expectations may be, and the other team may have to kind of take a step back or two and just kind of figure out what they're actually going to be like heading into the rest of the season.
Yeah, so for the barn burners list, my thought process was we're not going with some of the more obvious ones. Like I left Ohio State, Michigan off that list. Obviously, we know Ohio State, Michigan is going to be a barn burner. So more of the rivalry-based games I left off the list. What I was trying to do is say, look at the depth of the league on how we think these games are going to be really charged up atmosphere, charged up fans, and an awesome matchup. We don't even necessarily need the top teams in the league for some of these games to bring the heat. Then I kind of did it chronological, and right at the top, dude, I'm so geeked for Illinois at Indiana. So what is the fun stuff?
Early in the year. It's so early.
God. Oh, I absolutely, I mean, as far as I'm an Iowa guy, non-Iowa games, blue blood games, it's number one. And I'll be honest with you, it's more exciting to me than a lot of Iowa games and some of the blue blood. This has got. So what do we have here? What is the cool stuff? Both teams shocked everybody last year by winning 10, 11 games. Absolutely incredible. So you got both teams with momentum coming into the season. Who was the more talked about coach last year than Kirk Cignetti? Nobody. Who's the more talked about Big Ten head coach this year than Brett Bielema? Nobody. And then you've got the fan bases. All right, they're used to hating each other because of basketball. So you've got Illinois and Indiana fans jawing each other during the winter. Typically, now all of a sudden it's the middle of June, and I've got polls that I put out, and it is overtaken by who? Illinois and Indiana football fans fighting about who's going to win this game, who's the proper, new kid on the block. I mean, this game's got everything. I cannot wait And then you get into personnel stuff, like you've got a really good Illinois offensive line going against a really good Indiana defensive line. You've got 2 seasoned quarterbacks. One's new at a school, one has been there. And then you already kind of said it, like whoever wins this game exhales and gets to look around and say, see, I told you, we are going to be good again this year. The other team is going to have some soul searching to do 100%. Like the season is not over, whoever loses this game, but the reactions from college football fans and X and all that stuff, that's how it's going to feel to that fan base. I absolutely cannot wait for this football contest.
And because this game is so early, with both Illinois and Indiana not being nearly the biggest brands in college football, in terms of being in that playoff conversation, and this kind of just piggybacks off of what we were just talking about, you're immediately going to be written off as being one of the third or fourth Big Ten team that might make the college football playoff. And I know that there's not the auto bids and that sort of thing yet. I just feel like it's assumed that there'll be 3 or 4 teams in that conversation from the conference. Sir. But I do want to ask, I know I don't have Big Kurt on here right now. What are kind of his thoughts on where the Illini stand heading into the season?
My co-host of the Eyes on Big podcast, Big Kurt, an Illinois fan, he would say a long-suffering Illinois fan until recent here a little bit. He is I think he's trying the reverse psychology, situation where he's like, listen, I'll be happy with 8-4 or better, okay? Because it's a tougher schedule than I think a lot of people are giving it credit for. I don't know if like where he feels with this game. I mean, he knows with Illinois going on the road to Indiana, it's going to be a tough game. I don't think he expects Illinois to win the game. So he's got a little bit muted, expectations. But, along the lines of that question, let's say Illinois goes 9-3, okay, whether they win the Indiana game or not, that's Illinois, responding again with a great season. So all that's on the board.
Yeah. I think that about gets through everything I wanted to talk about today. But Jeff, before I let you go, anything you want to plug about the Eyes on Big podcast coming up?
This is what we do, folks. We talk about all 18 teams in the Big Ten. I've been having a blast this year with doing team-specific podcasts where I bring somebody on that's, a quote-unquote expert on their team, asking them the same 4 or 5 baseline questions. The first one where I kind of ask them is, heat check. How's the program doing? How are the fans doing coming in to the season? Those have been an absolute blast for me, but we're doing all of those in the off season. Then as we get closer to end of August, we'll do our predictions on the podcast for how we see things are going to go. And it's a lot of fun to talk about. And especially this year, I think this is going to be an absolute blast. So join us on the Eyes of Big. We're on Spotify. We're on Apple. We're on all that stuff.
Jeff, I appreciate you as always, and I'm just like you and everybody else who listens to your show, very excited to get another college football season started here in about a month and a half, something like that, 5 or 6 weeks, something like that. It's finally almost here.
We got week 0 first. We got that fun little appetizer.
Week 0 is great. The game selection isn't always fantastic, but it's college football, and it's. I get one last thing I'll say. The game they decided for week 0 is super weird. Kansas State and Iowa State up in Ireland. Isn't that Farmageddon usually? Farmageddon rivalries in the Big 12. Very weird to do that up in Ireland, I feel like.
Well, they farm for potatoes there, I guess. So you could bring Farmageddon there, but it's a slap in the face to that rivalry. It's like we think so little of this rivalry. We're moving it from rivalry weekend into here, like the week 0 just to try to get some eyeballs on the Big 12. But I think we can all get into agreement here, Hoosier fans, that we're going to cheer for Kansas State, because why would you cheer for the Cyclones? That is a fun game. But Clowns. Don't get me.
I'm probably laughing too easily at that one.
Don't get me wrong. That is an excellent, amazing game to start the college football season with. I wish they had 1, maybe 2 better teams that we would like to look at, maybe. And then I don't like how the schedule's set up for now, which is basically the early game, and then we skip the afternoon and go into the evening. I'd like to see a afternoon game. But as we talk about in the podcast a lot, we typically have we take lines into account. Let's just say that. So if you happen to be a person that does that, you can make week 0 as fun as you want it to be, even with some of those lesser games.
Absolutely. Jeffrey, appreciate you. I'll definitely be having you on throughout the season as always, and I appreciate your time and all that you give me for this show.
John, love it. Thanks for having me on. Always look forward to it.
A shout out to Jeffrey the Greek for all that he does for the show when he comes on. And I definitely appreciate him coming on all the times that he does. And real quick, we talked afterward. There's a chance I'm going to be making an appearance on his show here very soon to help him kind of, I mean, we'll kind of continue what we, I guess, started today when it comes to talking about Indiana and what to expect from them as we get ready for another season, second season with Kurt Cignetti. So plenty of things to get excited about with Indiana football. One last thing I'm going to mention, I want to get to a YouTube comment that I really enjoyed reading and hearing their perspective on before we wrap things up today. It's from Stephen Tater Swingle. By the way, love the name. Don't know how much of that name is your real name, but I like the name, Stephen. But Stephen says they should bring back the Crossroads Classic, but have Kentucky and Louisville in it. IU can play UK and Purdue can play Louisville, then rotate it every year between Gamebridge and the KFC Yum Center. Stephen, I think that is a brilliant idea that I don't know will actually come to fruition. But I think it's something that if that's the way, this would definitely work more if John Calipari was still with Kentucky, because of course he loves playing a neutral site non-conference games. So that's something that if Calipari was still the head coach of Kentucky for, I think you would definitely get his approval for that. I still think it's possible, but we'll have to wait and see. Of course, the likelihood of that happening will have to make it to where all their schedules align to where that specific weekend is year in and year out available. But hopefully once, I know Indiana's got a couple years of the series with Kentucky kind of locked in. Maybe if to make this a real possibility, maybe they'll explore options like that as they get closer and closer to, wanting to expand the series and that sort of thing. So good comment, Stephen. And if you want to comment on anything we talk about in today's show or previous shows, you can do that, of course, down below, and I'll share it on future episodes depending on how much it is relevant to what we're talking about. So appreciate you guys as always. Real quick before we wrap it up, I want to go and mention I will not be around for another episode next week. I'm taking the week off just because I'm taking vacation time, some PTO from my day job, I'll say, my iHeart job. So I wanted to be able to sit back, relax, enjoy time off with my family, especially while my wife is still off work and we're still enjoying her time off with our 3-month-old now as well. So looking forward to that. But we'll be back the following week to react to everything that takes place at Big Ten Football Media Days, and we'll really get things kind of shifting towards a brand new season for college sports and more specifically college football, as we are very, very close to seeing what things will look like for the Hoosiers and Kurt Cignetti in his second season. So very excited about that. Very excited for another year of covering Indiana sports. So hopefully you guys are excited as well. And until a couple of weeks from now, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by thehoosier.com.